Welcome to this course on understanding buying signals. My name is Alex Kinedinik and I'll be your instructor. In this video, I'll tell you a little bit about what to expect from the course, a little bit about my background in sales, and we'll start right away. Well, this course is made to be taken in a very short time, under 1 or 2 hours, so you can immediately begin to apply the ideas in this course to your work the same day, maybe even the same hour as you're watching the very first videos, because it's very actionable and very practical, because the advice and ideas and strategies in this course come exactly from my personal experience with 10 years of selling B2B products and 20 years selling online to consumers. And what I've done on my own is I didn't start out being a salesperson. I had to make all the mistakes, figure out, oh, I'm losing sales here, I'm losing sales there, and perfect every part of my own sales process. And by the way, I'm a small business owner, so for my sales process, it's high stakes, because if I lose money, it's directly money that doesn't go in my pocket. So for me, it was really high priority, really important, and I focused on it very good and turned myself into a very effective salesperson who doesn't lose a lot of sales and has a high conversion rate, because obviously for me it was so important. And understanding these buying signals is also, of course, it's going to help you sell better, but what it's also going to do is it's going to help to prevent you from wasting time of trying to sell to the clients who will never buy or will buy at a very low conversion rate. I'm going to show you how to weed those out so you don't waste your time with them, and instead take that time that you freed up and spend it selling to high potential clients so you can sell more effectively for higher ticket sales, which is really what just about all salespeople dream of, and do this efficiently and effectively. So that's the course. That's what we're going to talk about. Buying signals that you can be sensitive to and notice early, and help your sales process with that. So welcome to the course, and let's begin. To start our course, I want to provide you with a number of definitions so that we're on the same page as we go through the course and there's no confusion. The first definition I want to provide is, what is a sales prospect or a sales lead or potential client? All of these terms are interchangeably used in the industry and by me in this course. They just mean someone who has learned about your business, hasn't bought yet, and they're somewhere along the sales process. They could be early in the sales process or late in the sales process, almost ready to buy. But if they haven't bought, they are a lead or a prospect. We're going to talk a lot about leads and prospects because we're going to try to read their buying signals, right? That's what this course is all about. So that's that definition. And we needed that definition to define what is a buying signal exactly. A buying signal is something that you would read from your potential lead, your sales lead, or your prospect, however you call it, that person. It's a set of clues that you would read. These are body language, verbal, nonverbal cues that salespeople use to determine whether any potential lead or sales prospect is ready to move forward in the sales process or to buy. Because if you're sensitive and you're good at reading buying signals, then you know exactly how to guide and shepherd your prospects along the sales process. Because if you're a little too aggressive, if you misread buying signals, that will turn buyers off. If you're not aggressive enough, you might be missing an opportunity because they're ready to buy and you're still talking to them about something else, which is really common, and in the sales world almost heartbreaking, because you work so hard to get that person to discover your business, then to take them through the sales process, and they're like ready to buy, and the salesperson is clueless and just talking about something else and still selling. That person's ready. These are both cases in which you may lose clients. In sales, you want the exact opposite. You want to close clients, and buying signals will help you understand if you're getting weak buying signals. That may be a sign to ask some kind of probing questions. Maybe some need isn't getting addressed and the client is hesitant. So if you're intelligent about it, you can find what is the issue and solve that for the client so that they can move forward. But if that client is already ready to buy, then you lead that client or lead or prospect, you lead them towards buying if you see that they are ready. And this is all dependent on the salesperson being good at reading these kinds of cues. And so now that you understand exactly what is a lead, what is a sales prospect, what are buying signals, we are ready to start the course and explore how exactly you can become great at reading and understanding buying signals in your potential buyers. In this video, I want to talk about arguably the main buying signal that appears at any part of the sales process, either early on or late in the sales process. It can appear anytime. And the number one thing that will give you the right kind of a clue. And this is whether the lead, the potential buyer, is themselves moving the sales process along. Not you moving the sales process along, because I know you would do that, but if they're doing it for you. Because you see, usually you sell something to solve some kind of a problem or inefficiency or issue for someone else or some business. This is common. And if they really have that problem, and if it's a bad enough problem, they're going to want to solve it naturally. And so they will be motivated to move further along the sales process. So they might ask you, hey, give me some details about this. You provide the details. Then they might come back, oh, great. What is the price? Okay, you come back with the price. Oh, great. Then they will ask you, well, I like what you're doing. I like the offer, but I have an issue with this thing. You address that thing. Like, this is called a sales objection, where like everything is great, but this thing is a problem. You address that problem. Then they tell you, okay, that problem is addressed. Now, you see, they're kind of next thing, and you're happy to answer all those questions because you're hoping that they're moving along the sales process. And so what you're looking for is, are they asking the next insightful and sophisticated question that will move them along the sales process? Like, they might ask, how would this work when you deliver? Like, when I buy, how would this work? How long would it take? Oh, when I buy, if they use language like this, obviously it's a buying signal. They're already imagining themselves buying, right? So you see, oh, great. They've had all their questions answered. That buying objection was placated. They're not worried about that anymore. And now they've naturally moved themselves along the sales cycle, and they're asking, how would the delivery, how would the onboarding be? What are the next steps? This is exactly what you want. This is the main buying signal. If they are themselves naturally taking themselves through the buying process, as opposed to if the buying process is kind of a flat line. They keep asking questions, but they're not like moving forward. And when they run out of questions to ask, there's like a radio silence, right? Maybe it's over email, and like they ask you a question, many questions in the same day. Great. Then you ask them, so great, I've answered all your questions. Do you have any more questions? They say no. You say, are you ready to make the purchase? Radio silence. They disappear, or they come up with another reason, like, oh, now I have to get permission from my boss. I'm like, really? Now you got to get permission from your boss? Like, didn't you have permission before? These kind of things where like something is preventing them from moving further along the sales process. And you might ask, I answered this question. You had a concern. Is that still a concern? Is there another concern that you have? So you might kind of probe and ask, what is the issue really? And if they don't have a great answer, but they're still kind of flatlining, that's not a good sign, right? The good sign that you universally want to watch for is whatever your previous interaction was, compare that to your current interaction, and is that a step towards buying? If it's not a step towards buying, it's a bad sign. If it's a step towards buying, this is the ultimate buying signal. They're still interested. They're moving along your sales process. It's a good sign, and you just have to be sensitive about what is the next easiest step for them to take without getting turned off, without getting kind of spooked, without getting a bad sense for what's going to happen, without losing trust, so that all the positives stay, but you're gently shepherding them towards little tiny steps along your sales process to eventually buying. This is really what you want to watch for, and this is arguably the number one sales signal that you really want to be sensitive to. Now let's talk about verbal cues and verbal affirmations your potential buyers might make that will be buying signals. Many people think that when a client asks, "What is the price?" it kind of sounds like a buying signal, like they're interested in buying. But in my experience, this is just as much an unbuying signal as it is buying, because if they don't know the price, half of the time they learn the price, they buy, half of the time the price is too high for them and it's a deterrent and they go away. So actually it's not a great buying signal yet, because this is actually a clue that they're pretty early in the sales process. What is a buying signal is when this kind of a question is rephrased. Instead of "how much does it cost?" if a client asks you, "What are the payment options?" then they're actually picturing themselves going through the payment options. Or they might ask, "Is there a bundle discount?" Okay, so they know the price, they're looking for a bundle discount. That's an even better. Like if you can sell maybe one item for $500, for example, but if you sold 5 items, even if you discount by 25%, you still made a lot more money. So bundles are great. If they ask about that kind of a thing, then you know it's a great buying signal. You're like, "Yes, I can come up with a perfect bundle for you. What are exactly your needs so I can make something perfect for you?" Now, you see the difference between what is the price and is there a bulk discount? Sounds similar, but very different. Also, there are buying signals in questions about how your product would work. So here's an example of 2 questions. The first question is, "Does your product do XYZ?" versus, "How can this product integrate into our system?" They might seem similar because if the product does XYZ, maybe it integrates into their system. But what if the product doesn't do XYZ? That's as much of a signal that they may not buy. The outcome may be that they can't buy this, it's not a fit for them. But the question of how would this integrate in our current system or our current workflow? You come up with a perfect way for how this would fit. When they're asking how would this fit into our current workflow, they're imagining how this product will work after they buy it. It's a buying signal. Whereas if they just ask about a feature, like does it do this, does it do that, you don't really know if they're truly imagining that. They could be not. It's a question that comes up a little earlier in the sales process. So there are very subtle clues that make a big difference in the phrasing of how your potential buyers ask you things. Also, you can pick up great buying signals from questions that can be categorized as implementation questions or logistics questions. For example, a logistics and implementation question might be, how long will it take for our team to get up to speed with your product? They're literally trying to create a timeline already after they bought. Or, what are the next steps? Do you have a contract to sign? Of course I do. Sign there. Sold, right? These are great buying questions for next steps or implementation. Similarly to the question of how long will it take my team to get up and running with this tool or service, you might hear a question like, how long will it take to set up? It's a great question because you should have an answer something like this. The setup will be in 24 hours. We'll be there every step of the way. Our customer success manager or me, I'll be there to help you. We have world-class customer support and we'll make the setup as smooth as possible. You've answered that in the best possible way. Whatever their concern was, they're already thinking, if I buy this, will it take a long time to set up? And you're like, no, 1 day. Or super fast, or whatever is fast in your industry, come up with a way to be faster. Now, also there are comments that can be categorized as decision-making comments. People often think of what I'm going to tell you as buying signals, but I'm not sold on it. Here's an example. A decision-making comment might be something like this. Let me go and talk to my team or my manager to see if it's possible or what we can do. Of course, if that truly happens and they have a conversation about what can be done, great. They can come back and say, well, maybe your price is too high. If you give us extra 10%, we will buy. That's great. It's pretty common. And as long as they buy, that extra 10% is fine. Discounts are common in sales. That scenario, if all such statements led to all such outcomes, like let me go back and talk to my team, if every time somebody said that, the outcome was, oh, we're going to buy now. Like they come back in 3 days and, oh, we decided to buy. That's fantastic. So then it would be a buying signal. But very often, this is a statement that's a masked sales objection. They don't want to say no. And so this is kind of a cop-out. They're like, well, we're not going to say no directly, but we're going to lead the person on. They're not thinking, oh, we're going to lead them on. But that's what happens. They lead you on. You're waiting. But really, they just said no in a confused way. In my experience, most of the time when people have these kinds of ambiguous statements, like they just kind of go off to think, unfortunately, more often than not, if I don't reach out to them and if that's the last interaction in the conversation, especially if it's early on in the sales process, you lose that client doesn't come back. So the difference here is if this statement comes up on the later stage of the sales process, it's a buying signal because they've talked through a bunch of things. You kind of know that they want it because they're already far along in the sales process and they're just going to come back to their manager or their team, iron out the details, come back with a final proposal. That's a buying signal when they say that late in the sales process. But don't confuse it. When that statement comes early in the sales process, they're too unsure. This is, in my practical experience, this has been mostly the case. So be careful of that statement. Know when it arises because it's a common thing people say. And take appropriate actions. Like you want to save it if it's early on in the sales process, and you save it by asking questions. You might ask before you hang up on the call or email. You might follow up with the email. Is there anything else I can help with? Would you like me to explain more about the bundles or whatever? Their answers will give you clues as to what their real intentions are, and then you can understand their inner sales objections that they have, they're not voicing, and start addressing them. And maybe save that client and placate and make them feel good about the concern that they had. Now, the next kind of a statement that your potential buyers might make can be considered as positive feedback or agreement style statements or even objection handling resolutions. Here's how they might sound. That sounds exactly like what we need. Or we've tested the market and we really like your solution. Or if people say, we've been looking for something like this for a while. We're glad we found you. This is a dream statement because you know that they're really happy so far. Of course, people never tell you that, unfortunately, because they know they have to negotiate the price later. And if they show their cards, like they're too eager, you might charge them a higher price. They lose leverage in negotiations, so they rarely actually are so positive. But every once in a while, you might get a statement like that, and you know, oh, this is a buying signal. We are close here. And lastly, I want to leave you with a statement that might sound really good, but is actually bad. So here it is. If a potential client asks, if I buy, would you be able to change this feature for me or make this personal adjustment or customization? Sometimes this statement is coupled with, are there discounts? Can I buy it for a discount? Maybe you agree on a discount, and then they say, well, this almost fits my need, but can you customize the product in this way? This sounds great, right? They want to buy already. You've agreed on the price. They also want the product. They just want a little tweak to it. Sounds great. These are buying signals, but there is a big pitfall here. Customization is expensive. It's going to take you at least time, sometimes money, sometimes additional resources, plus that discount So you're basically making a sale minus discount, minus the distraction of your resources, or you have to do some more work or change some features or some customization. So that's a cost. So now you've got two costs. Not to mention that if you work for a larger company, you're not the one providing customization, right? You're the salesperson, your engineering team is providing customization. They might come back and say, we actually don't want to do that, or we cannot do that, because very often in the business world, there's kind of a pattern, a good practice of not doing customizations. Unless your business specializes in custom work, or your business is known for tailoring individual solutions, like high-end kind of boutique sort of business. But most businesses cannot do customizations, because imagine if one person asks for customization, another one. Suddenly, all of your engineering resources are working on customizations for that one client, but are not moving your product forward. And so engineering teams understand to say no to most of those requests, even if it comes from sales and buyers. So you ultimately have to say no. So what you could do is not say no to that client. You almost close that sale. What you could say is that, there is this method of playing good cop, bad cop. Like, you're the good person, you want to make it happen for them, but the engineering manager doesn't say yes. So your option is to say, I would love to do a customization for you. You don't want to say but at the same time, what you want to say is, the engineering team said not no, but they're able to make this small customization. So small customizations are fine because they're fast to do, they're cheap to do. Probably your team has done it before, it's easy. Just not large customizations. And in addition to this small customization, because I understand that it's not exactly what you wanted, to make it up to you, we want to give you this additional thing, whatever it is, another throw in, something easy to deliver, just to make them feel good and appreciated. That's a kind of a good way to say no while saying yes. Like, you're really telling them no, the customization that you're asking, we cannot do it. But you're telling them in a yes, like, yes, we can make another customization that's similar, smaller but similar, and we can give you something extra. That will be a way to handle that potentially awkward situation and potentially money-losing request to a request that's feasible, that you can close the sale with. Now let's talk about buying signals that you might notice if you're communicating over email, because over email, you cannot hear the person, you cannot see the person, so there are fewer buying signals overall, but there are still some. So when you're emailing with anyone, let's say a lead comes in and says, hey, I'd like more information about your product. Well, if they say like that, exactly, I'd like more information about your product, that is not a great sign, because they aren't proactive enough and they haven't shown a lot of desire for your product or a lot of research about your product. They're just asking the most basic question there is. They're like, went to your website, didn't read anything, and they emailed you. So they missed a lot of details, like maybe the price, maybe how your process works. And all of these decrease the chances that they'll buy, because maybe the price doesn't work for them, or how you work, it maybe isn't a match for how they need you to work. So all of these things that they haven't figured out yet are risks, and they decrease the chances of buying. So what you really actually want is proactiveness in the consumer. For example, it's a very different signal if they email you from the first time and they say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I would like this package, and this package from your website, it looks great. That means their approach is more professional. They've done their research. They've done their due diligence much better. Also, they're knowledgeable about how you work. They likely found your pricing. They likely went through the sales process already on their own to a large degree. That the initial example I just mentioned of the person asking, hey, tell me more about your business or how you work. That person didn't do any due diligence. And so the person who asks the more sophisticated question, the more insightful, knowledgeable question, they're showing you they're very interested, they've done the research, and all the research they've done has not turned them off. They're still emailing you. Even though it's the first time they're emailing you, that person who's more sophisticated and did their due diligence and still likes what you're doing is far closer to buying. And the other thing you want to watch for is the frequency of their replies. Some people might reply like once a day. Maybe they're busy, but also it shows that it's not a priority for them. Or if they drop off, like they send you 5 or 10 messages that same day back and forth, and then the next day it's crickets, and the next day it's crickets, something went wrong, right? So that's a bad sign. You want to check in and ask, do you still have any questions? Is there anything I can help you with? You're looking for their own sales objections that they're hopefully working through in their mind that they can invite you to help with. And if you can understand what their concern is, placate that concern, make them feel okay about it, they can come back to the sales process. But generally speaking, you want to watch for, as a buying signal, the frequency of their replies, especially when things have to move forward in the sales process. Like, let's say they're asking, can I change the product when I get it? How soon will I get it? What is the price? All these kinds of little details. And let's say they run out of questions and they don't disappear. They start asking next questions that signal to you that they're moving themselves along the sales cycle. That's a great sign. But if they disappear, that's a bad sign, because they're off on their own making a decision. And if they're doing that, you can't really influence it. So you want to maybe be a little patient, follow up in a day or two. Hey, is there anything else I can help with? So hopefully you can inject yourself back into the sales process to ideally influence them so they don't buy a competitor's product, but buy your product. Or maybe show them with extra attentiveness that you can win them over that way. But essentially, these are the things you want to look for. How sophisticated they are. Are they moving themselves along the sales process? Are they doing their own research? Are they proactive? And there's a lot of terminology and phrases people use, but I find that the phrases, they're helpful, but they're kind of like a second thing, because if you see that a person is moving themselves along the sales process, the right phrases follow that, not the other way around. So a lot of people look for, what if I buy this product? Or, that sounds great. Or thank you for explaining that. Those positive kinds of phrases that your potential clients might send you. But I feel like whenever I have a sale, I see, those positive phrases, they weren't the signal. The signal was that this person was moving themselves attentively and proactively along the sales process, and then those nice phrases just came as a result of them getting their answers and moving forward. So that's what you really want to watch for, is, are they moving themselves along the sales process? And this is, by the way, universal, like on email, on social media, in person. This is really the cue. Now let's talk about buying signals that come from nonverbal communication and body language, because in any kind of communication, there are things that are said explicitly, and there are many, in fact, most things are communicated with nonverbal cues or body language. So let's discuss what you can understand from that. And before we do that, I want to point out that there's been a lot of research in recent years that has debunked a lot of the prior knowledge that used to be, commonplace household knowledge. So you may be familiar with statements or ideas like, well, if a person has hands in their pockets, they are unconfident of themselves. You may have heard something like that. That's hand in pockets. This is nonverbal communication, body language. You may have heard a statement that sounds like, if a person looks down, that means they're not sure of themselves or they're lying. That's a really common thing people say. If a person is fidgeting, you might hear they're nervous or something like that. For decades and decades, these statements were repeated by people as though they are true. But in recent years, there's been a researcher Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She is a world-class researcher on emotional intelligence and understanding body language. The research that she did, which was groundbreaking in neuroscience and the top universities, her findings have become standard. And what she found is that, let's say you meet a stranger and you try to read their body language cues or nonverbal communication, you may assume, without ultimately being tested, that whatever assumptions you're making about the other person's body language is accurate. But the truth is that these are assumptions and they're never confirmed or denied. It's just something you start thinking, but you don't even know if it's true or not. But what she ended up finding after testing is that when we meet people whom we don't know, like for the first time, our reading of their body language and nonverbal communication is only slightly better than chance. Again, only slightly better than random. So most of the time it means that, or much of the time, we're making errors. And if we're basing important decisions or important sales processes on our assumptions, that could be very costly because you don't know why a person may be looking down. Maybe their back is hurting, or maybe they have some pain, or maybe there's a million reasons. You just don't know. And so the accurate way to read body language is to have multiple touch points with a person. The more familiarity you have with an individual, the more you start to see consistency across their body language and what they say and how they behave ultimately. And then you start to understand body language specifically to them. So people who know each other for a long time have a lot of accuracy in understanding each other's body language, which is it just makes sense, right? Like married couples, they don't even have to say anything sometimes, but they understand what they're thinking. But you don't have that with the person you're meeting for the first time, especially in a sales setting or a business setting, because people are naturally awkward sometimes in a business or sales setting, especially if they're getting sold to. They're awkward. It's not a comfortable conversation, especially if they have to say, I don't want to buy this, or I can't afford this, or whatever their objection is. So here's the modern and better way to understand nonverbal cues and body language. You want to couple that with definitely still monitoring and being sensitive to the other person's body language, being aware of their cultural background, because people from different cultures just behave differently, but also because even that, just understanding culture, won't really help you to increase your accuracy too much. You want to combine that with, if you see anything unusual or different, ask a question that's not too pushy or probing, but that gives them a chance to express themselves. Maybe you see that they're still hesitant and you think, well, I've answered everything, but they're still hesitant. And you don't know exactly why, but it seems like it. Then this is a great moment for you to ask, did I answer everything? Or I just want to make sure that last question you had, did I really answer it well? Or is there still some confusion or hesitation on your part? And that won't be 100% solution, but it will help in many cases. People will just tell you. And of course, the more touch points and the more interactions you have with a potential buyer, the more familiarity you have with them and the more accurately you can tell what's going on in their mind. And as you're trying to understand what they're feeling and thinking a little more, this is getting in the realm of empathy and emotional intelligence in sales, which will actually help you understand your potential buyers better, create better pitches for them, better sales packages for them that will get them to buy. And so that's all really helpful to your sales process. And lastly, of course, because it's a sales process, it's not a random situation. See, it's a first time for your buyer, but for you it will become, maybe it's the first time, but pretty soon it will be the 10th time, and pretty soon it will be the 100th time. And so you'll gain a lot of understanding where in the process the challenges arise. Like in my, for example, sales process, it's the price conversation. A lot of people drop off because I charge slightly higher end prices than my competitors. That's just me. And so I know that because that's what happens. And you can ballpark that, or you can use a data-driven approach and actually measure, like, hey, we've lost leads when we had this part of the conversation that we entered, or this part of the conversation was difficult and we lose leads here. Maybe we can create a better answer to this particular sales objection because the current answers aren't satisfying clients and they're not moving forward. So that familiarity with your own process and your own sales bottlenecks will actually give you clues when to be extra vigilant and extra more sensitive to looking at the body language and nonverbal cues in your potential buyer and seeing, is there anything different? Is something changed? Is there something in their eyes? And if there is, then you take those steps, asking extra questions, being extra careful. But just be careful if it's your first time or one of your first times. Don't rush to make conclusions about people's body language, because the level of inaccuracy is far larger than traditionally we have thought. In this video, I want to introduce a fun and a very useful concept, and these are not buying signals, but unbuying signals. And yes, this is a term I made only for the purpose of this video, but unbuying signals are really important, because if you aren't keen and you don't notice these unbuying signals, in other words, signals that show you that a potential client is never going to buy or is very unlikely to buy. There's a small chance they'll buy, but it's unlikely. If you don't notice these, you're going to continue to sell to them, to try to put your effort into it, time, money, etc. And it's just going to all waste your time. So this is really important so that you can devote this time to the right leads who are going to buy. So the first unbuying signal is if you think about your meetings or interactions with a potential client as a graph. A sign of a buying signal is if you can kind of connect the dots of positivity. If you look at a chart, for example, you meet them for the first time, it's a positive interaction. You interact for the second time, it's more positive, and the conversation kind of flows towards buying. It's not at buying yet, but it's moving along the buying process, inching closer and closer to buying. That's good. But an unbuying signal would be if that graph is flat, if they're always kind of asking preliminary questions or aren't sure. This happens a lot, especially to new salespeople. Just a few days ago, I was talking to a student of mine. He had a business, which was a marketing agency for local businesses. And he didn't have many clients because he was just starting out. So he found this local business owner to whom he was trying to sell. And their conversations went like this. They met once, it was pretty good. Then they met again, it was pretty good. But this potential buyer just wasn't sure if it's right for them. And in the second meeting or the third meeting, they didn't know if they needed that kind of marketing that this student of mine was trying to sell to them. And so every time they met, they sort of were beating around the bush, talking in circles around the same thing. So that's a sign of an unbuying signal. Inside that conversation are further unbuying signals. For example, if a client explains to you that they don't know much about the space, they don't know much about marketing, let's say you're selling marketing services, but they say they don't know much about marketing, that means they're a very unsophisticated lead. Not sophisticated in how smart they are, but just in how sophisticated they are in the subject matter. So they can be great people, sophisticated otherwise, but just in the subject matter, they're not sophisticated. But if you're trying to sell to them something that they need, why are they unsophisticated about it up to now? That means they're just not getting it. And you're unlikely to be the savior who's going to totally educate them, because it's likely not about that. If they need something and they haven't tried to figure it out before they met you, it's not that likely that you're going to change things. The issue usually lies within somewhere in them rather than you. So that's another unbuying signal. The level of their sophistication. You want them to be at least knowledgeable that they need your product, because if they don't know that they need your product, that's a huge unbuying signal. You don't want to be, there's this saying, selling ice to the Eskimo, which is a really bad saying. You do not want to be selling ice to the Eskimo. This is what this is. That's an unbuying signal. You don't want that. You want selling ice to somebody in the desert. Of course, they're going to buy it so much more. They'll pay higher prices, everything. That's ideal. Maybe as an ego boost, you might say, I could, but why would you ever want to when there are so many better scenarios for you out there? So that's the other unbuying signal. Lack of sophistication to the point that they don't even know whether they really need a solution like yours. It might not even be yours, but they haven't tried anything similar. That's a huge unbuying signal. And another unbuying signal that occurs relatively frequently is if you notice that the questions and the style of conversation that your lead is having with you doesn't actually move them along the sales process. Good buyers ask the kinds of questions that will make or break the sale. If it's not right for them, it's not right. But if it's right, they'll move forward naturally along the sales process, down your sales funnel. Because, they want the product, they want a solution, they have some problem, they need a solution. It's real for them, right? But there are some people who wouldn't do that. Like they will ask you some kind of a question, you will answer it, but the next question it won't feel like they're moving the sales conversation towards buying. Like sometimes they'll just get on random tangents or talk about themselves, but not in a way that's relevant to buying. Just like, 10 years ago and 20 years ago, I was the first one who thought of Facebook and like a lot of people who just chat and it's fine to chat, but you're not there for that, right? It's not a friendly conversation. It's a sales conversation with a friendly element to it. So you want to stay on track and say, to ask yourself, why is this person not trying to solve their own need that I'm trying to solve? And you might ask, hey, did I answer all your questions? If they say yes, would you like to know the pricing? Would you like to buy? Don't be pushy about getting them to buy it, because that can be a turnoff. But just ask about it, take them a tiny step towards buying. And if you see resistance, like, I don't know, I got to think about it. Well, something else is going on. And they might tell you, or they might not verbally tell you, but this is you reading unbuying cues of like, hey, they might never buy. They're just spending a lot of time, but something is preventing them from buying. You want to spend less time in that sales process. And lastly, there are many, many, many unbuying clues that you can gather very early on in the sales process. And this is a big one for a lot of businesses, because let's say a lot of businesses, they have this problem. They get, let's say, hundreds of leads, but most of them, they find that business randomly and they're never going to buy. But they're going to ask a bunch of questions, exchange emails, maybe want to meet. And this is really expensive. Imagine you meet for 15 people for 15 minutes with everyone. Well, it's pretty quickly a whole day of meetings, and you don't want that day to be filled with like poor, low quality, low converting leads. So what you want to do is ask questions early on. What industry are you working in? How big is your company? Are you looking to get this soon or within the next 3 months or year? And they will tell you about themselves. So this is self-qualifying questions. You need to know about this client. You can do this in a form of a survey that you give to your potential leads, like they fill out some kind of a form online. How big is their company? What is their budget? And if you sell like high ticket items, but you see that they can't afford it, well, this is an unbuying signal immediately. So this is a way to vet clients. Now, in my experience, because I do this a lot, I learned over time that there isn't a 100% scenario that I can reliably observe and say, this is a buyer or this is a not buyer. Sometimes people use unsophisticated language but end up buying a lot for whatever reason. And sometimes vice versa. Sometimes people seem like, they're coming from a bigger company and they have a big budget, but like they don't end up buying. Who knows why, so it's not 100% foolproof situation. It's not a yes or no, like a light switch. There's a gray area in this. And because there's a gray area in this, you do not want to judge leads too quickly. So what you can do is smoothly kind of put them into buckets. Some people who will tell you, hey, we're coming from such and such company, our CEO made the decision to buy this, so we're looking for a solution. Okay, you know, these are interesting phrases, right? CEO, we're a company, we're established, we want to buy this, we've already made the decision. Like, there's a lot of information in there that, like, you think, well, there's a lot of potential here. So why don't I spend more time with them? Maybe get on that 15-minute call just to explore, because it could be a waste of time, but it could be like a big sale. But you might also get an email saying, like a one-sentence email, need buy thing. Okay, need buy thing. Every business will get that email sometime. Now, this is the worst email you would write. They don't even tell you what thing. And it could be just because maybe they're a second language English speaker. Maybe they're not good at writing email. There are many reasons. Maybe they just, if they're so incoherent, it's unlikely that they're coming from a big company and have a big budget. But you don't know. So what you can do in such a case is not totally disregard, but just take it to a bucket of like, hey, I'll continue to reply to this potential buyer by email, even though they've kind of qualified themselves as a low potential buyer, but I'm not going to disregard them. So whenever I have time, I'm going to go to this bucket of emails and I'm going to answer it as a second or a third priority. And I'm going to give highest priority to the sophisticated clients who seem like they have a big budget. Because, that's what any business needs to do. They have to decipher which leads are great, which leads are not so great. And this is what you do. And my suggestion is just to not totally disregard the leads that seem bad, because they can turn out to be really good. Because I've had situations in the past where people from other countries approached me, and at first their message seemed like it was almost gibberish, like, they weren't good writers in English, and so I couldn't really even understand what they were saying. But then it turned out, like they're a sophisticated big buyer. So these are all the unbuying signals that you want to watch for, but very importantly, don't disregard people too much. Just put them in buckets, and some people spend a little time with, some people spend a lot of time with some others, and that way you'll save time without losing any of the potential buyers.